a silence that speaks. What if the loudest grief was silence? Every August 11, Zelda Williams disappears. No quotes, no memories, just a quiet space where words used to be. She doesn't vanish because she forgets. She vanishes because remembering, when shared by millions, can feel like a storm you can't escape. This is not just a story about a famous daughter. It's a story about love loss and the quiet ways we choose to survive. And maybe, just maybe, it's a story we all need to hear. The silence of a daughter. Every year, when the calendar turns to August 11th, a quiet absence settles over Zelda Williams' corner of the internet. No memorial photos, no heartfelt posts, just silence. For most of us, grief is private. But for Zelda, the daughter of a beloved comedian known across the world, her grief has never truly belonged to her alone. Robin Williams was more than a household name. He was a presence in living rooms, a spark of joy in dark times, a voice that could both break your heart and make you laugh seconds later. And when he passed, the world wept. Strangers lit candles, shared quotes, uploaded tribute videos. The internet became a shrine, and Zelda's inbox, her social media pages, became crowded with memories that weren't always hers. For those of us who have lost someone we deeply loved, we know how tender anniversaries can be. But imagine your father's face plastered across news feeds every year, stories of his death retold, dissected, questioned. Imagine trying to find space to mourn while the world demands access to your pain. So every August 11, Zelda chooses silence, not because she doesn't care, not because she wants to forget, but because the grief that lives inside her needs stillness, not the noise of thousands of notifications. Her silence is not empty. It is full of memory, full of sorrow, full of love. It is a way of reclaiming something deeply personal in a world that made her loss so public. She once wrote that it sometimes feels like she's a roadside memorial. People pass by, leave their flowers, and move on comforted by the idea that they've remembered. But she stays behind, carrying the weight of those flowers and the memories they represent. Even roses by the truckload she wrote still weigh a ton. For older generations who have weathered deep losses, perhaps this quiet resonates more than any words. You understand that not all mourning is visible, that silence can be sacred, that some wounds never fully close, especially when reopened by others' expectations. Zelda's annual absence is her quiet way of saying, "This is how I survive." And maybe it's a gentle reminder for the rest of us to hold space for grief, for memory, for privacy. Because love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply sits beside you in the quiet. And in that quiet, something tender remains. Robin Williams, the man beyond the stage. The world knew Robin Williams as a whirlwind of characters, a genie, a teacher and nanny, a therapist. He had 1,000 voices, 1,000 faces, and each of them brought light to millions. But beyond the camera, beyond the spotlight, Robin was something simpler, more enduring. He was Dad. To Zelda, he wasn't the man on the screen. He was the man who made up bedtime stories on the spot, who crouched to eye level when she was sad, who turned the most ordinary moments into magic. He had a way of making his daughter feel like the center of the universe, because to him, she truly was. Friends close to the family often spoke of how Robin transformed the atmosphere at home, not with performance, but with presence. He would sit quietly with his daughter during hard times, holding space for her, never rushing her pain. His humor, so often electric in public, became soft at home, warm and tender, like a blanket on a cold night. Zelda once shared that her father never forced laughter. At home, he didn't need to entertain. He needed only to be. And in that being, he offered something precious, the freedom to be fully human without an audience. He brought tea when she was sick. He stayed up late to help with homework. He'd leave little drawings in her lunchbox or notes that said, "I'm proud of you," just for being you. This was the Robin most of us never got to see, not the performer, but the protector. The man who stood quietly behind the curtain of his daughter's life, cheering her on. Not for applause, but out of sheer love. What's so often forgotten is that the greatest legacy a person leaves isn't fame or awards. It's how they made the people closest to them feel. For Zelda, Robin left a legacy of gentleness, of quiet strength, of a father's unwavering love. It's easy to think of legends as untouchable, but Robin wasn't that. He was deeply human. He wrestled with fears, with doubts, with illness, but through it all, he kept showing up for his family, for his daughter. Even on the days he didn't feel strong, he still chose love. To those who only knew the icon, he seemed larger than life. But to Zelda, he was wonderfully human-sized, a hand to hold a smile across the dinner table, a father who never stopped loving. And in the end, perhaps that's the version of Robin Williams worth remembering most. Not just the man who made the world laugh, but the one who made his daughter feel safe, seen, and cherished. What is Lewy Body Dementia, really? When the world learned of Robin Williams' death, many assumed it was depression that took him. But the truth was deeper, quieter, and more complex, hidden beneath the surface of smiles and jokes. It was Lewy Body Dementia, a disease most people had never heard of. Lewy Body Dementia isn't something you see coming. It sneaks in slowly, like a fog rolling across a familiar landscape, obscuring what once felt safe and known. One day, you remember the route home. The next day, the street signs feel foreign. Familiar faces blur. The world begins to feel strange and frightening. For Robin, the symptoms weren't just confusion or memory loss. He began experiencing vivid hallucinations, seeing things that weren't there. He felt an unshakable anxiety and paranoia that crept in like shadows at dusk. His hands trembled, his thoughts twisted into unfamiliar shapes. Unlike Alzheimer's, which primarily affects memory, first Lewy Body Dementia attacks unpredictably. One moment you're fine, the next you're convinced something is terribly wrong. Some days are lucid, others are not. That unpredictability is what makes it so cruel, not just for the person experiencing it, but for the loved ones watching. Zelda once spoke of the heartbreak of seeing her father struggle to understand what was happening to him. He knew something was wrong, but the doctors didn't yet have answers. He felt himself slipping, and there was no name for what he was facing. Lewy Body Dementia is caused by abnormal protein deposits called Lewy bodies building up in areas of the brain that control thinking, memory, and movement. These proteins interfere with the brain's signals, like static on a radio that only gets worse. To explain it simply, imagine trying to walk through your home, the one you've lived in for years, but now all the furniture has been moved, the walls repainted, and someone keeps turning the lights on and off. That's what the world begins to feel like. Traditional treatments for other dementias often make Lewy symptoms worse. That's why diagnosis is so critical and so difficult. It takes specialists, neurologists, time Robin didn't have. And yet, even as the disease took hold, Robin kept showing up on set at home in life. That's the tragedy and the testament. He was fighting a battle his audience never saw, even as he made them laugh one last time. Today, millions live with Lewy Body Dementia, many still without a diagnosis, and millions more care for them confused and overwhelmed. They are spouses, children, friends trying to navigate a storm without a map. Perhaps by telling Robin's story, we shine a light on the shadows this disease casts. Perhaps through understanding, we begin to offer hope and dignity and time, because behind every brilliant smile, there may be a silent fight, and every fight deserves to be seen. Zelda's grief. When grief becomes public property, there's a unique kind of pain that comes with being the daughter of someone the world loved deeply. When Robin Williams passed, it wasn't just a private heartbreak. It became a global moment of mourning. Tributes poured in headlines, lingered, and strangers filled timelines with quotes and memories. For Zelda, that kind of public grief felt like standing at the center of a storm she never asked to weather. She once wrote, "I sometimes feel like a roadside memorial. People leave their memories and go on, but I'm still here, buried in everyone else's grief." It's a haunting image, isn't it? A quiet place on the side of life's highway where others pause to remember, then move on, comforted by the gesture. But for the one standing there, holding it all, it's not a moment. It's a weight. When we lose someone, especially a parent, grief becomes a deeply personal process. We may cry in silence, sort through old letters, sit in their favorite chair just to feel close again. But for Zelda, that process was interrupted over and over again by strangers who meant well but didn't know where their love ended and her pain began. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some kind, others intrusive. People poured their hearts out to her, hoping to feel closer to Robin through his daughter. But what they didn't see was the emotional cost, the expectations, the pressure to respond, to carry their loss on top of her own. For older adults who've navigated the loss of a spouse, a sibling, or a dear friend, you may understand this too well. The way others sometimes project their grief onto you, how you become a keeper of memories not because you asked to, but because they need somewhere to place their pain. But grief isn't a communal performance. It's a quiet, unsteady walk. Some days you carry it gently, other days it knocks the wind out of you. And sometimes the most compassionate thing we can offer someone in mourning is not words, but space. That's what Zelda asks for when she logs off every year. Space. Space to be a daughter, not a symbol. Space to remember her father, not as a character or a legend, but simply as dad. And in doing so, she gently reminds us, just because someone's grief is visible doesn't mean it belongs to everyone. It is still sacred, still theirs. So the next time we feel the urge to reach out to someone in the public eye who has lost a loved one, perhaps we pause. We whisper a silent blessing. We honor their silence as much as their voice, because sometimes the greatest respect we can give to someone's grief is to simply let it be. The Invisible Battle, Robin's Final Years. In the final stretch of his life, Robin Williams fought a war that very few saw and even fewer understood. From the outside, he was still the man with a spark in his eye, still offering laughter, still showing up. But inside, something fragile was unraveling. Lewy Body Dementia isn't a gentle visitor. It doesn't knock and ask to come in. It barges through the door and scatters the furniture of the mind. For Robin, the signs were subtle at first. A misplaced thought, a forgotten line, an unfamiliar sense of fear in familiar places. Then came the tremors, the anxiety, the sleepless nights. He would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, confused and disoriented. Simple tasks became struggles. Words that once flowed like rivers began to hesitate, to tangle, to hide. He knew something was wrong. That was perhaps the most heartbreaking part, his awareness. He was a brilliant man, sharp and sensitive, and he felt himself slipping. He felt his world warping in ways he couldn't explain. He didn't know it was Lewy Body Dementia yet. Neither did those around him. All they knew was that something had changed. He was afraid, not in the way a man fears danger, but in the way a soul fears being lost. Imagine looking into the mirror and no longer being able to trust what you see. Imagine hearing voices, seeing things, and not knowing whether they are real or part of the storm within. And yet through all of it, Robin kept trying. He went to work. He hugged his wife. He told jokes. Even when the laughter took longer to rise, he reached for it. Because that was who he was. Not just a man of joy, but a man of resilience. His family has shared that during those final months, he was deeply frustrated with himself. He would cry without knowing why. He would apologize even when he hadn't done anything wrong. He wanted to protect his loved ones from the darkness he didn't understand. There is a cruel silence to diseases of the mind. Unlike a broken arm or a visible scar, the world can't always see what's broken inside, and so many suffer quietly. Robin was one of them. To the public, his death came as a shock, but to those closest to him, it was the end of a long, painful unraveling. Still, even in the pain, there was love. Robin never stopped loving his family, never stopped trying to be present, even when his mind was pulling him elsewhere. That perhaps is the true mark of courage, not the absence of fear, but the will to keep showing up in the face of it. Robin Williams left behind more than a filmography. He left behind a legacy of empathy, of gentle strength, and of a battle fought with quiet dignity. His final years may have been marked by confusion and fear, but they were also lit by love, and that light is still with us. Stories from other families. Facing Lewy, Robin Williams' story brought Lewy Body Dementia into the light for many, but his wasn't the only story. Across America, thousands of families are quietly navigating the same unpredictable terrain with far less recognition and even fewer answers. Take Susan, a retired librarian from Ohio. Her husband, Bill, was once a high school history teacher known for his sharp wit and boundless energy. One day, he forgot the names of his students. A week later, he accused a colleague of spying on him. Then came the tremors, the sleepless nights, the strange voices only he could hear. At first, Susan thought it was stress or early onset Alzheimer's. Doctors dismissed it as anxiety or depression. It took nearly 2 years before someone finally said the words, Lewy Body Dementia. By then, Bill had lost much of his independence, and Susan had lost much of the man she had known for decades. She speaks softly about the transformation. He wasn't just forgetful, he was frightened. Some days he didn't know who I was. Other days he'd break down crying because he did. Her voice trembles when she recalls the moment he looked at their wedding photo and asked, "Who is she?" Susan isn't alone. In California, a daughter named Marissa helps care for her father, who was once a jazz pianist. Now he sometimes plays music for hours. Without recognizing, he's repeating the same tune. He smiles at shadows, talks to people who aren't there. She says, "It's like watching someone disappear in slow motion." These stories don't make the news. They aren't headline material, but they are real and they are heavy. For every famous name, there are thousands more families living with the confusion, the fear, and the heartbreak that Lewy body dementia brings. What makes this disease particularly painful is its unpredictability. Loved ones may be lucid one moment and lost the next. There's no clear timeline, no predictable progression. Caregivers live in a constant state of emotional readiness, bracing for what might come next while grieving the pieces already lost. But within the sorrow, there is also strength. Families adapt. They create new ways to connect. A gentle touch, a familiar song, a quiet moment, watching the sunset together. They learn to speak love in ways that don't require memory, only presence. When Robin's diagnosis became public, many families felt seen for the first time. They realized they weren't alone in this strange, disorienting world. And in that realization, there was comfort. Perhaps that's what stories are meant to do. Not just honor those we've lost, but remind the living that their struggles are shared, their love is powerful, and their courage matters. Behind every quiet home, every late-night whisper, every brave face in the doctor's office, there's a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Why Zelda logs off, and why that matters. Every August 11, as the internet floods with tributes and memories of Robin Williams, one voice gently goes quiet. Zelda's. She logs off. She steps back, and for a moment, she allows the silence to speak for her. To some, this might seem unusual. After all, in an age where grief is often shared in real time, where hashtags mark anniversaries and mourning becomes a kind of public ritual, stepping away might feel like stepping out. But for Zelda, logging off isn't a rejection of her father's legacy. It's a way of protecting it and protecting herself. When you are the child of someone beloved by millions, your personal loss becomes public property. Strangers grieve alongside you, sometimes with sincerity, sometimes with expectation. They leave comments, share their pain, and often hope that you'll help carry theirs too. But grief isn't scalable. It's not something that can be divided and shared endlessly. Zelda knows this. She knows that in order to keep the parts of her father that matter most, the quiet jokes, the warm hugs, the loving glances, she needs space. Space that isn't filled with likes, shares, and notifications. Logging off is her way of drawing a gentle boundary. It's not a wall, it's a window with the curtains pulled closed. It says, "I'm here, but I need this time to be mine." There's something profoundly brave in that, especially in a world that often pressures us to perform our pain, to be available at all times, to explain our silence. Zelda's decision to go quiet isn't an act of withdrawal. It's an act of courage, of self-preservation, of honesty. And it matters not just for her, but for anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed by the weight of shared grief. Older generations especially understand this kind of quiet mourning. Many of you were raised to carry loss quietly, to bow your heads and carry on. But that doesn't mean the pain isn't there. It means you've learned that grief has seasons, and some of them require stillness. Zelda's choice is a reminder that healing doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a walk alone. Sometimes it looks like staying home when everyone else is gathering. And sometimes it looks like pressing pause on a world that moves too fast. Her silence is not absence. It is presence turned inward. It's a sacred space where love can breathe, where memory can settle without the noise of the crowd. And in choosing that space, Zelda gives us permission to grieve in our own way, in our own time. Because love isn't measured by the number of words we post. Sometimes it's measured by the moments we keep close to our hearts, quiet, unspoken, but no less real. Hope amidst loss, seeking help. In the quiet that follows grief, it's easy to feel alone. When the cards stop coming, when the calls fade, when the world continues on, your pain can begin to echo in an empty room. For many, especially older adults, there's an unspoken belief that we should carry loss privately, stoically, that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But Zelda Williams offers us a different image. Each year, on the anniversary of her father's passing, while she retreats from the spotlight, she leaves behind something powerful, a list of resources, phone numbers, crisis lines, quiet gestures that say, if you are hurting, you are not alone. It's her way of reaching back into the darkness and offering a hand, not with noise, but with intention. And that matters more than most of us realize. Grief, especially when coupled with depression, can feel like walking through fog. You don't know what direction to take. The world becomes dimmer, and the hardest part is believing that anyone would understand what you're feeling. But someone will. There are people, real people on the other end of those phone numbers. Trained professionals, kind strangers, even volunteers who simply want to listen, not to fix you, not to tell you how to feel, but to walk beside you until the fog starts to lift. For older adults, especially those who may have lost a spouse or longtime friend, isolation can be dangerous. Loneliness isn't just an emotional wound, it becomes physical. It affects sleep appetite, heart health, and yet so many suffer in silence because they believe their pain is too old, too deep, too personal to share. But healing doesn't age, it doesn't expire, and you're never too far gone to reach for light. That's what Zelda's message reminds us each year, that no matter how famous your family is, or how private your grief may feel, seeking help is an act of strength. It's an acknowledgement that your story still matters, and that your presence, yes, yours, is worth protecting. If you or someone you love is struggling, please don't wait for the pain to become unbearable. Talk to someone, a friend, a doctor, a voice on the other end of a hotline, because sometimes all it takes is one conversation to change the direction of a life. Robin Williams brought joy to millions, but even he needed more than applause. He needed understanding, compassion, care. We all do. And the greatest tribute we can give to him, to Zelda, to ourselves, is to care for one another, to reach out, to speak honestly, to say, I need help, and believe that help will come, because it will. Let's talk about grief. Honestly, grief is a journey most of us are never prepared for. It doesn't follow a map, it doesn't honor the clock, and it rarely fits neatly into the expectations others place on us. For many older adults, grief is a familiar companion, quiet, persistent, and often unspoken. We were raised in times where emotions were kept close to the chest, where loss was acknowledged but not explored, and where tears were something best shed in private. But silence over time can become heavy. When Zelda Williams chooses silence on the anniversary of her father's passing, she does so with purpose. But not everyone has that kind of space. Many carry their grief day to day, to the grocery store, to church, to family dinners, wrapped up behind a polite smile and the phrase, I'm doing fine. But what if we stopped saying fine when we're really not? What if we allowed ourselves to say, I miss them today, or I woke up crying this morning and I don't even know why? What if we gave ourselves and each other permission to grieve out loud? Grief doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. Sharing our grief doesn't mean we're stuck. It means we're trying to move forward with honesty. When we talk about our pain, we invite others into our healing. We let them know that it's okay to feel deeply, to remember, to mourn even years later. And grief isn't just about death. It's about any loss that changes who we are. Retirement, illness, the passing of time, the distance between old friends. These are all griefs that deserve a name, a space, a voice. In many communities, especially among older generations, there's still a sense of shame around sadness. But emotions are not problems to be solved. They're messages to be heard, and when we ignore them, they don't go away. They grow louder, pressing on our hearts, our health, our hope. Talking honestly about grief opens doors to support groups, to therapy, to trusted conversations over coffee. It creates connection where isolation used to live, and it helps us remember that while grief may never fully go away, it can be carried with less pain when we carry it together. Robin Williams once said, "Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." Be kind, always. That includes ourselves. Let's be kind enough to ask, how are you really doing? And brave enough to answer, I'm grieving today. Because the truth is, when we speak our grief, we make room for healing. And when we listen to someone else's sorrow, we remind them they are not alone. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can say isn't, be strong. It's, I see you. Legacy of laughter, legacy of love. Robin Williams left behind more than just movies, more than memorable characters and iconic punchlines. He left behind moments where the world felt lighter, kinder, more human. Moments that reminded us that laughter is often the first step toward healing. But beyond the screen, Robin's truest legacy wasn't just laughter, it was love. It was the way he looked at his children, eyes soft, heart wide open. It was the quiet encouragement he gave friends, the kindness he offered to strangers, the generosity that never made headlines but lived in the small, meaningful things he did for others. His daughter Zelda carries that legacy, not with fanfare, but with quiet grace. Every year, she steps back, not to escape, but to preserve what is sacred. In that silence, she honors him not as a performer, but as a father, not as a public figure, but as her guiding light. That kind of love doesn't fade. It echoes. It echoes in every conversation about mental health that his story sparked. It echoes in families who now recognize the signs of Lewy Body Dementia because they heard his name. It echoes in strangers who choose to be kinder, softer, because they remember what Robin once said, "Be kind, always." For many of us, especially in the later seasons of life, we begin to understand that legacies are not built on success alone. They're built on how we made people feel, how we showed up, how we loved. Robin's greatest role was not on a stage. It was at the dinner table, on the phone with a friend, in the arms of his children. His laughter changed the world, but his love changed lives. So today, as we remember him, not just the actor, but the man, we are invited to do more than mourn. We are invited to live better, to listen deeper, to laugh louder, and to love even when it hurts. Because if grief is the price we pay for love, then love surely is the legacy worth leaving behind. Let this be a gentle reminder, even in the quiet, even in the sadness, we are surrounded by traces of those we've loved. They are in our words, our gestures, our stories, and as long as we carry them forward, they are never truly gone. Thank you, Robin, for the laughter, for the light, for the love. And thank you, Zelda, for reminding us, through silence, through strength, that the most beautiful tributes are often the most tender.